Alright, let's try this again. Take two. Okay. So, I'm gonna get into today. Like you see, I don't normally wear my glasses, but I have to be able to read today. This is more kind of what I've been trying to get my channel to become, which is more factual and, like, historical and true crime and everything else, where I will kind of give you some history about some things that are important to myself. Today we are going to get into LGBTQ. So, like, we're going to get into the flag and the Stonewall Inn riots. So, first off, I wanted to get into the flag. A lot of people don't realize that, or they kind of, like, get upset that we use the rainbow flag. The rainbow flag is not just something we've used. The rainbow flag has been used since the 16th century. Italian. It was kind of a peaceful march in the 16th century by some German peasants in 1961. It was originally, for them, flown from violet to red. Like, you know, gay flag is red to violet, or LGBTQ flag, excuse me. It has also been used for Mahar Baba in 1924 as a peaceful flag of protest, Carcello in 1944, as well as, in 1978 is when they started using the gay pride flag for the march in San Francisco. Originally, the flag was brought up as a artist piece by Gilbert Baker, who was also a gay man in San Francisco Bay Area. It was used for the fourth Pride of San Francisco. It has gone through a lot of renovations, done differently since 1978. The original flag itself was pink, orange, yellow, green, indigo, turquoise, and purple. As you know now, it's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. In 1979, they removed the indigo. They combined the indigo and the turquoise to form a royal blue together. The pink symbolizes sexuality. The red signifies life. The orange is healing. Yellow is sun. Green is nature. Royal blue is harmony. And violet is spirit. As you know now, there's another one that has come out that has brown and black as well. This is just for all of equality. Whether you're black, brown, any color of the rainbow, it's for you to be equal. We all should have equal rights. I did kind of want to mention the whole straight pride thing. It does bother me a whole lot that they seem to think they need their own parade. Like, it's not against straight people, trust me. It's just that, as you can see, we have gone through a whole lot to be who we are. Straight people have not had to go through that. The only example would be those of authenticity have ever had to worry about the type of injustice that we've had to do just to be able to love who we love. It's nobody's right to judge us, to judge anybody of any color, of any sexuality, of any sex whatsoever. And I just kind of, I see that certain places, like Chicago, I think it was, has legalized a straight pride march. And I'm like, what day was it that they decided that they were being victimized? Like, do they have an issue with walking down the street and getting beat up and killed? Like, we still, to this day, we've gone quite a ways with our equality, but there are still people being killed and hurt for just to love. So it just really bothers me to think that the straight people need to have their own day. Like, they have a day every day, pretty much. They have the right to walk down the street. They have the right to love who they love. They have the right to work where they work. They have the right to go to any cake store and buy any cake they want and not questioned on whether or not it's for a LGBTQ wedding. But that's kind of my soapbox. I'm try to do more videos like this, so just bear with me. This is my first video. I'm going to be pretty much reading, trying to kind of wing it, but I want to make sure this is a very important subject for me. Like, I didn't learn this about the Stonewall riots in school. I didn't learn about any of this in school. I mean, until high school, I didn't even know anything about gay, lesbian, or anything. Like, I knew that I saw girls attractive, but I was taught it was wrong. You know, that you were with a boy. As a girl, you were with a boy. As a boy, you're with a girl. Like, that's just the way it is. So when I got into high school, it was a big difference. I got my first girlfriend. You know, it was a huge thing to all of a sudden be like, oh, it's normal for some people to like the same sex, you know. But anyway, that's my soapbox. So like I said, I got this from the Wikipedia website. Hopefully it's in order. And so let's get into this. I've got some pictures, I've got some things. By all means, it's not like top-notch Matthew Centuro stuff. Sorry. I like to be raw and myself. I don't want to have to... I have a full-time job, and I don't want to have to sit down and edit like some people do. I don't got the time. So, the Stonewall riots, or also they consider it uprising, the Stonewall uprising, or Stonewall rebellion. It were a series of spontaneous violent demonstrations by members of the LGBTQ community against a police raid that began in the morning hours of June the 28th of 1969. As you know, we just celebrated the 50th anniversary, I guess you can say, of the riots this year. At the Stonewall Inn in the Greenwich Village neighborhood of Manhattan, New York City, they are widely considered to constitute the most important event leading to the gay liberation movement and the modern fight for LGBTQ rights in the United States. Gay Americans in the 1950s and 1960s faced an anti-gay legal system. The last years of the 1960s, however, were very continuous, as many social political movements were active, including the Civil Rights Movement, the counterculture of the 1960s, and the anti-Vietnam War, which kind of all those together influenced the Stonewall riots. It kind of gave them the catalyst, and, you know, Rosa Parks standing up for herself all kind of gave them the influence. Let's see here. Very few establishments welcomed gay people in the 1950s and 1960s. Those that did were often bars. Although bar owners and managers were rarely gay, at the time the Stonewall Inn was owned by the mafia. Which, I don't know, back then it seemed like a lot of things were owned by the mafia, especially New York and even here in Oregon and Washington. Those that did were often bars, although bars... Okay, sorry. I already read that. At the time, the Stonewall Inn was owned by the mafia. It catered to an assortment of patrons, and it was known as to be popular among the poorest and most marginalized people in the gay community, such as drag queens, transgender people, butch lesbians, male prostitutes, and homeless youth. Police raids on gay bars were routine in the 1960s, but officers quickly lost control of the situation in the Stonewall Inn. Tensions between New York City police and gay residents of Greenwich Village erupted into more protests the next morning, and again, several nights later, within weeks, village residents quickly organized into activist groups to concentrate efforts on establishing places for gays, lesbians, to be open about their sexual orientation without fear of being arrested. If you were caught in any way being gay, lesbian, through any atmosphere or anything, you had the possibility of being arrested, which is really sad to think, that 1 minute you could be walking down the street holding your wife's hand and bam, you're going to jail. Gays and lesbians in the New York City face gender, race, class, and generational obstacles to becoming a cohesive community. Within 6 months, 2 gay activist organizations were formed in New York City. There was also 3 newspapers established to promote rights for gays and lesbians. And then within a few years, gay rights organizations were founded across the U.S. and the world. June 20th of 1970, the first gay pride marches took place in New York City. In Los Angeles, the National Wall National Monument was established in the site of the Stonewall riots in 2016. Let's see, June 6th, coinciding with the New York City celebration, New York City Police Commissioner James P. O'Neill rendered a formal apology on behalf of New York Police Department for the actions of its officers at Stonewall in 1969, which he probably was not even on the force at that time. I kind of wish the people, like the mayor, which we'll be getting into, because now we're going to get more further back into the background. It's very disorganized, I'm sorry. But you'll see that he should have been, Senator should be the one that's apologizing. It's his fault. Alright, this whole thing was spurred by the national emphasis on anti-communism. Senator Joseph McCarthy conducted hearings researching from communists in the U.S. government, the U.S. Army, and other government funds, agencies, and institutions, leading to national paranoia. Anarchists, communists, and other peoples deemed un-American and subversive were considered security risk. Gay men and lesbians were included in the list by the U.S. State Department, which is probably why we get such a stigma now. Back then, we were considered bad, and, you got the Catholic Church making up things and everything else, so. In 1950, a Senate investigation chaired by Clyde R. Hoy noted in a report, it is generally believed that those who engage in overt acts of perversion lack the emotional stability of normal persons. And it said all of the government intelligence agencies are in complete agreement that sex perverts in government constitute security risks. And then between 1947 and 1950, 1,700 federal job applications were denied. 4,380 people were discharged from the military, and 420 were fired from their government jobs for being suspected of homosexuals. So, you didn't even have to actually be. If you were just suspected of being gay or LGBTQ, you would lose your job. In 1950s and 1960s, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation and Police Department kept lists of known homosexuals, their favorite establishments, and friends. The U.S. Post Office kept track of addresses where material pertaining to homosexuality was mailed. State and local government followed suit. Bars catering to gay men and lesbians were shut down, and their customers were arrested and exposed in newspapers. Cities performed sweeps through neighborhoods, parks, bars, and beaches of gay people. They outlawed the wearing of opposite-gender clothing, and universities expelled instructors suspected of being homosexual. So it's pretty much like rounding up with the Nazis, How dare you be any different than what the stereotypical should be. In 1952, the American Psychiatric Association listed homosexuality in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual as a mental disorder. In 1956, however, the psychologist Evelyn Hooker performed a study that compared the happiness and well-adjusted nature of self-identified homosexual men with heterosexual men and found no difference. Her study stunned the medical community and made her a hero for too many gay men and lesbians, but homosexuality remained in the DSM until the 1974. Let's see here. In the response to this trend, two organizations formed independently of each other to advance the cause of gay men and lesbians to provide social opportunities where they would socialize without fear of being arrested. The LA area homosexual created the Mattachine Society in 1950, in the home of a communist activist, Harry Hay. They were to unify homosexuals, educate them, provide leadership, and assist sexual deviants with legal troubles. I don't like how they say sexual deviants, like we're bad. Their objectives were to unify, facing enormous opposition to the radical minds about homosexuality by proving that gay men and lesbians were normal people, no different from heterosexuals. Several women in San Francisco met in their living room to form the Douglas of Billets DOB for lesbians. Although the 8 women who created the DOB initially came together to be able to have a safe place to dance, as the DOB grew, they developed a similar goal to the Machen and urged their members to assimilate into general society. And then there was a challenge to the government of repression in 1953, where an organization named One Inc. tried to publish a magazine called One. And the U.S. Postal Service refused to mail its August issue, which concerned homosexual people and heterosexual marriages, on the grounds that the material was obscene despite it being covered in brown paper wrapping. The case eventually went to Supreme Court, which in 1958 ruled that One Inc. could mail its materials through the postal services, which was kind of a win to us. And then Frank Kameny founded the Mattachine of Washington, D.C. He had been fired from the U.S. Army MAP services for being a homosexual and unsuccessfully to be reinstated. In 1965, news on Cuban prison work camps for the homosexuals inspired Machen, New York, and D.C. to organize protests in the United States Nation and White House. Similar demonstrations were held throughout the whole country in different government buildings. They also kind of were protesting against the U.S. employment discrimination. These pickets shocked many gay people and upset some of the leadership of Machen and the DOB, and at that time, demonstrations on the civil rights movement and opposition to the Vietnam War all grew in prominence, frequency, and severity throughout the 1960s, as did their confrontation with police forces. The very first riot actually took place in 1959. It happened in the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people stage a small riot at the Copper Donuts Cafe in Los Angeles in 1959 in response to police harassment. In a larger 1966 event in San Francisco, drag queens, hustlers, and transvestites were sitting in Compton's cafeteria when the police arrived to arrest men dressed as women. A riot ensued, with the cafeteria patrons singing cups, plates, and saucers, cups, plates, and saucers, and breaking the plexiglass windows in the front of the restaurant, returning several days later to smash the windows again after they had been replaced. Professor Susan Streicher classifies the Compton's cafeteria riot as an act of anti-transgender discrimination rather than the act of discrimination against sexual orientation, and connects the uprising the issues of gender, race, and class that were being downplayed by homophile organizations. It marked the beginning of transgender activism in San Francisco. So in Greenwich Village, the Manhattan neighborhood of Greenwich Village in Harlem was home to a sizable homosexual population, as I said before, after World War I, when men and women and those in between had served in the military, took advantage of opportunity to settle in a larger city. The enclaves of gay men and lesbians, described by the newspaper story as short-haired women and long-haired men, developed distinct subculture through the following decades. Prohibition individually benefited gay establishments as drinking alcohol was pushed underground, with other behaviors considered immoral. New York City passed laws against homosexuality in public and private businesses, but because alcohol was in high demand, speakeasies and impromptu drinking establishments were so numerous and temporary, the authorities were unable to police them all. By the early 1960s, a campaign to rid New York City of gay bars was in full effect. By order of Mayor Robert F. Wagner Jr., who was concerned about the image of the city in preparation for the World's Fair of 1964. The city revoked the liquor license of the bars, and undercover police officers worked to entrap as many homosexual men as possible. Entrapment is usually consisted of undercover officer who found a man in a bar or public park, engaged him in conversation. If the conversation happened to head towards the possibility that they might leave together, or the officer bought the man a drink, he was arrested for solicitation. One story in the New York Post described an arrest in gym locker room where the officer grabbed his crotch, moaning, and a man asked him if he was all right, and the man was arrested. The Machetney Society succeeded in getting newly elected Mayor John Lindsay to end the campaign of police entrapment in New York City. They had more difficult time with the New York State Liquor Authority. While no laws prohibited serving homosexual, courts allowed the SLA discretion to improving and revoking a liquor license for businesses that might become disorderly. Now we're going to get into more of the establishment of Stonewall Inn and the riots itself, which was the main purpose of this video. I'm sorry, this is a very long video, but it's very important. The Stonewall Inn is located at 5153 Christopher Street, along with several other establishments in the city, were owned by the Genovese crime family. In 1966, 3 members of the Mafia invested $3,500 to return the Stonewall Inn into a gay bar, after it had been a restaurant and a nightclub for heterosexuals. Once a week, a police officer would collect envelopes of cash as a payoff, as the Stonewall Inn had no liquor license. It had no running water behind the bar. Used glasses were run through the tubs of water and immediately reused. There were no fire exits, and the toilets overran consistently. Though the bar was not used for prostitution, drug sales, and other cash transactions took place. It was the only bar for gay men in New York City where dancing was allowed. Dancing was a main draw since reopening the gay club. Visitors in the Stonewall Inn in 1969 were greeted by a bouncer who inspected them through a peephole in the door. The legal drinking age at that time was 18, and to avoid unwittingly letting in undercover cops, who were also called or nicknamed Lily, Law, Alice Blue Ground, or Betty Badge, visitors would have to be known by the doorman or look gay, which I don't know how they discriminated, like looking gay. The entrance fee on weekends was $3, in which the customers received 2 tickets that could be exchanged for 2 drinks. Imagine only getting 2 drinks. Patrons were required to sign their names in a book to prove that the bar was a private bottle club, but rarely signed their real name, which I don't blame them, because they were arresting gay people. There were 2 dance floors in the stone wall. The interior was painted black, making it very dark inside, with pulsing gel lights and or black lights if police were spotted. Regular with white lights were turned on, signaling that everyone should stop dancing or touching. So this is kind of the layout of the place at the time. Let's see here. Kind of show you guys. In the rear of the bar was a smaller room frequented by queens. It was the one of 2 bars where some men who wore makeup and teased their hair, though dressed in men's clothing, could go. Only a few transvestites or men in full drag were allowed in by their bouncers. The customers were 98% male, but a few lesbians sometimes came to the bar. Younger homeless adolescent males who slept in nearby Christopher Park would often try to get in so customers could buy them drinks. The age of the Celestial ranged between the upper teens and early 30s, and racial mix was evenly distributed among white, black, and Hispanic patrons. Because of its even mix of people, its location, and attraction of dancing, the Stonewall Inn was known by many as the gay bar in the city. Police raids on gay bars were frequent, occurring on average once a month for each bar. Many bars kept extra liquor in a secret panel behind the bar or in a car down the block to facilitate resuming business as quickly as possible if alcohol was seized. Bar management usually knew about raids beforehand due to police tip-offs, and raids occurred early enough in the evening that business could commence after the police had finished. During a typical raid, the lights were turned on and customers were lined up and their identification cards checked. Those without identification or dressed in full drag were arrested. Others were allowed to leave. Some of the men, including those in drag, used the draft cards as identification. Women were required to wear 3 pieces of feminine clothing and would be arrested if found not wearing them. Employees and management of the bars typically arrested the period immediately before the 28th of June 1969 was marked by the frequent raids of local bars, including the raid at the Stonewall Inn on Tuesday before the riots, and the closing of the Checkerboard, the Telestar, and 2 other clubs in Greenwich Village. So now we're getting into the riots. So the layout of the Stonewall in 1969, which was this picture here. At 1:20 a.m. on Saturday, June 28, 1969, 4 plainclothes policemen in dark suits, so they weren't even in police uniform, 2 patrol officers in uniform, and Detective Charles Smith and Deputy Inspector Seymour Pine arrived in the Stonewall Inn's double doors and announced, "Police, we're taking the place." Stonewall employees do not recall being tipped off that a raid was to occur that night, as was the custom according to Duberman. There was a rumor that one might happen, but since it was much later than raids generally took place, Stonewall management thought the tip was inaccurate. Historian David Carter presents information indicating that the mafia owner of Stonewall and the manager was blackmailing wealthier customers, particularly those who worked in the financial district. They appeared to be making more money from the wealthier customers, particularly those who worked in the financial district. They appeared to be making more money with extortion than they were from liquor sales in the bar. Carter deducts that when the police were unable to receive kickbacks from the blackmail and the theft of negotiable bonds, facilities by pressing gay Wall Street customers, they decided to close the Stonewall Inn permanently. 2 undercover policewomen and 2 undercover policemen had entered the bar earlier that evening to gather visual evidence as the public morals squad waited outside for the signal. Once inside, they called for backup from the 6th Precinct, using the bar's pay telephone. They even used their own phone. The music was turned off and the main lights were turned on. Approximately 205 people were in the bar that night. Patrons who had never experienced a police raid were confused, and a few who realized what was happening began to run for doors and windows in the bathrooms, but police barred the doors. Michael Feder remembered. If you remember correctly, there is no fire exits. Things happened so fast that you kind of got caught not knowing. All of a sudden, were police there, and we were told to all get in lines and to have our identification ready to be let out of the bar. The raid did not go as planned. Standard procedure was to line up the patrons, check their identification, and have female police officers take customers dressed as women to the bathroom to verify their sex. It would just be awful. Be like, "Oh, let me see your dick." Upon which any men dressed as women would be arrested. Those dressed as women that night refused to go with the officers. Men in line began to refuse to produce their identification. The police decided to take everyone present to the police station. After supporting those cross-dressing in a room, and the second biggest fear was that my picture would be in a newspaper. Let's see. Police decided to take everyone present as separating and cross-dressing in a room in the back of the bar. Maria Ritter, then known as a mail to her family, recalled, My biggest fear was I would get arrested by the police, and recalled that a sense of discomfort spread very quickly, spurred by police to begin to assault. My goodness, I can't read today. Biggest fear was that my picture be in a newspaper or on a television report in my mother's dress. Both patrons and police recalled that a sense of discomfort spread very quickly, spurred by police, who began to assault some of the lesbians by filling some of them up by inappropriately while frisking them. Which, as you know, a male cop is not supposed to be frisking a female. When did you ever see a fag fight back? Now times were a-changin'. Tuesday night was the last night for bullshit. Predominantly the theme was, "This shit has got to stop." Anonymous Stonewall riots participant. The police were to transport the bar's alcohol to patrol wagons. 28 cases of beer and 19 bottles of hard liquor were seized, but the patrol wagons had not yet arrived. So patrons were required to wait in line for about 15 minutes. Those who were not arrested were released from the front door, but they did not leave quickly as usual. Instead, they stopped outside and a crowd began to grow and watch. Within minutes, between 100 and 150 people had congregated outside, some after they were released from inside the stone wall, and some after noticing the police cars in the crowd. Although the police forcefully pushed or kicked some patrons out of the bar, some customers released by the police performed for the crowd by posing and saluting the police in an exaggerated fashion. The crowd's applause encouraged them further. Wrists were limp, hair was pimped, and reactions to the applause were classic. Can you imagine? Let's see here.